Welcome to our second interview with Dr. Luba Schoenig. Welcome. Thank you for coming here today. I'm really excited to speak to you today. For those of you guys who don't know Dr. Luba Schoenig, she is a co-founder of UMushroom. She's also a visiting lecturer at the Adventere School of Management. And of course, she has worked at three really famous, huge companies, Lehman Brothers, Credit Suisse, and Julius Bär. Thank you very much for coming here today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and it's a huge pleasure to be in front of you today, given that I also did part of my education at the University of Zurich. So thank you for inviting me.
And let's begin with the Blitz. It will be short questions. You need to answer them also quickly, without extra thought. Just
okay.
Dinner with your children or with an influential partner or investor?
With my children.
Great choice. Quantum physics or quantitative finance?
Quantum physics.
Okay. Would you rather work one more time at Credit Suisse or Julius Bär?
Credit Suisse.
Wow. And then now continue the phrase, also short. I will never spend my time on
drugs.
Drugs. An important book or film in my life is?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Now you got me. An important book. I have at least 10. But let me then maybe quote The Lust of Ray Dalio about changing the world order. This is what I'm currently reading. It's an amazing book, recommendable. And The Man Who Solved the Capital Markets. The Man Who Solved the Market, about the late Jim Simons, the founder of Renaissance Technologies. An amazing mathematician and an amazing hedge fund manager. Was one of the first who actually applied quantitative finance. So the second one, The Man Who Solved the Markets.
Thank you. And last question, I came here today because?
Because I really love working with young talents in finance, as you guys are, and we love supporting education.
Oh, so sweet. Thank you. So let's begin with the very beginning, Bulgaria. You were growing up in Bulgaria and then you moved to Switzerland for your education. Why did you choose Switzerland? It's not like an obvious choice for a student.
It's not, and it's actually, to be honest with you, completely out of randomness. My best friend with whom I grew up, her parents working at the embassy of Bern. She speaks also Bernese German. And we went together to the high school. And when we finished, I was already studying economics in Bulgaria the first year. She came and said, listen, why don't we go and study in Switzerland? And I was like, why? And she goes like, because the universities are good. And back then it was relatively briefly after the changes. I didn't know a lot about Switzerland other than the regular facts, so we decided more as an experiment and out of an adventure to come and study. And I chose Fribourg because it was a beautiful combination to study and work, and it was bilang. And in the very last moment, my best friend went to Berlin because she wanted to study Scandinavistic, and I continued studying finance. So really random.
So you were studying and working at the same time?
I was studying and working at the same time, yes.
And how hard was it?
Back then it was possible. It was a question of organization, but we had the Blitz compared to you guys who have now Bocconi with a very tight, almost high school-like education. And back then I was working after my classes to finance my education because it's difficult if you come from Bulgaria for someone to finance your studies by default.
And looking now back to your studies, would you rather spend more time on studying or was it a great combination of working and studying?
It was an amazing combination. It was a very good balance between academia and real world.
Okay.
And I was working in McDonald's, by the way, and this was really real work, making sandwiches.
Right, okay, thank you. And Bulgaria, Switzerland, really different countries, very different mentality, cultures. Can you tell us some distincts and similarities between these two cultures that you faced?
It's very interesting. What first comes in my mind is the similarities. It's also a small country. We're 8 million, very similar like Switzerland. We also love and are very proud of our mountains. We ski a lot, we hike a lot. We are cheese lovers. And believe it or not, we're very hard workers and very well organized as well. It's a very outspoken country, similar with a, how shall we say, small but very awake and very conscious population. obviously we have opinion on every political question. We don't have direct democracy, but doesn't prohibit us from discussing literally everything which goes through politics. These are the similarities. And also, by the way, we produce amazing chocolate. It's always, I smuggle always chocolate to and fro between the countries. We're nature lovers, very much bio and aware of healthy living. That's also very typical. The difference is maybe definitely language, definitely the historical background. For example, when I came studying here, I didn't know a lot about economics the way we know it now, because we didn't have market economics and capitalistic economics in that sense. We had socialism, and it was a planned economy, it was everything collective ownership. So this is a difference which when I came here, I could see the differences in terms of how economic life is organized. But other than that, there are a lot of similarities. Very entrepreneurial folks, very honest, down to earth, very grounded.
So if you've been living there already for 20, 30 years, I guess, do you feel then Switzerland as your home, or Bulgaria? Like how is it to live for two homes, as I guess you have your family left in Bulgaria?
Yes, I mean both are homes. Bulgaria is my origin and Switzerland is my home as well. I live here longer than in Bulgaria. My family lives again in Bulgaria. They were traveling a lot for business. And my sister lives in Munich, so we're quite spread around, but both are homes, and I consider myself belonging to both parts, which makes it very easy given the similarities. But yeah.
It's nice. You've come to Switzerland to study, and right after you received your PhD, you've gone to the company everyone related in finance knows about and wants to talk about, everybody, just whom I talked to, Lehman Brothers.
Yes.
Can you tell us how was it to work in American company in Switzerland? Of course, this company had this American culture, as I understand, in Switzerland, which has another kind of culture. Can you tell us how was it? Was it bad, great experience in your life?
In terms of, it's an excellent question. So Lehman Brothers, this company, it's actually very pity what happened with the company, because it was a great place to learn the handicraft of derivatives. And I started after I finished my PhD in finance, I moved to work on the derivative side and as a structurer and sales in structured products. We had an amazing time to learn the handicraft. Very clever, very skillful people, very hardworking, with all the cliches of investment banking. Working 12, 14 hours a day. If you go at 8 o'clock home, in the evening, they're like, okay, why early today, etc. But I think this was part of the game as a junior in investment banking. It was a very competitive environment, which kind of trains you also to be very efficient and to be very aware of what you can and what you don't. It also, if you're smart, socially smart, it trains your instincts, because, I mean, obviously it was as mentioned, competitive. So if you want to keep your client base and make sure that when you go on holidays, no one steals your deals, what you do basically would be try to find friends with whom you can cooperate and help each other. And I'm still friends with all my friends from Lehman Brothers from back then, from Zurich and from London. We're an amazing crowd. We call each other every now and then on the 15th of September when Lehman Brothers declared bankruptcy. And we kept this friendship, and it was an amazing place for networking. Of course, with everything which an American culture brings with it's hire and fire, a fact. It trains you to be incredibly focused and oriented on profit and loss. It has pros and cons. Because sometimes if you develop long-term projects, and if you develop a healthy culture, it's not necessarily competitive culture. It's only competitive to an extent, but you have to make sure that people also don't cannibalize their efforts or don't spend too much efforts in unproductive tasks like politics or trying, to work against other teams. Those things, of course, this is one of the drawdowns of such a culture. But in general, it was a very good experience. It was an excellent training. And what is really amazing was you kind of really knew what you're doing at the end of the day, because everything was a P&L. You had like, you had a target, what you have to produce per day. And you could go home and say, okay, today I was good, or no, I need to be better.
But with this so much friendly atmosphere, as you said, could you notice some red flags in Lehman Brothers, or?
No, back then I was too junior. I wouldn't know. We were not in the US business. We were in the European business, and we would structure products. What actually happened was in the subprime crisis was the fact that, and it wasn't only Lehman Brothers, it was basically pretty much every bank who would be engaged in the underwriting of subprime mortgages. And you know how this works, right? A bank would deploy some part of the capital to finance mortgages. Then they would take away the mortgages away from the balance sheet of the bank, put them on something which we call special purpose vehicle. And on the back of it, in order to, it would wrap actually these mortgages in tranches and sell it to institutionals. Every bank was engaged in that. Lehman Brothers, because it is was an investment bank and not a general and a universal bank as UBS, was financed mainly by institutional money. And you know what happens, right, when institutional money is very nervous money, is that if there is a rumor in the market that something's going wrong, and those rumors came in 2007, very quickly institutionals exit. And I don't know if you remember what happened back then. Well, you obviously don't, because you were probably very young to follow those, but maybe you read the books. What was very interesting is in 2007, the market was already starting being on the brink of collapsing, and not collapsing, but you could see this hype was really starting to show the first, as we say in German, die ersten Risse, you know, the first signs of weakness. And a lot of investment banks back then in late 2007 did something which is allowed according to US GAAP. They would account for their fixed income, the bonds which they've issued, at market value. Normally you should actually account to not at market value, but at nominal value. Now, if you account on the liability side something where the market value is sinking, you create artificially or accounting-wise paper win. Again, but you need to disclose it according to GAAP. And all banks did this, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, etc. They disclosed it. The only one who didn't want to disclose it was Lehman Brothers. And that's where the beginning, out of a conference, I think it was David Greenhorn, the founder of Greenlight Capital, who actually kind of pointed out to this weakness of the bank, and he walked out, if I recall correctly, one of the hedge fund conferences and said, there is something going very interesting with the bank. Maybe we should consider shorting. And a lot of such things happened around which contributed to the... But we were far away from that. I understood these processes years after from books. I was young back then. Other banks actually said, look, if we account for our liabilities at market value, we would need to disclose it. And indeed, Lehman Brothers was not as transparent as other banks, which obviously immediately shook the trust of investors. And if you recall, the same happened with Credit Suisse in a different context, not exactly with respect to liabilities, but also once a bank loses the trust, and this is the main capital of a bank, it's very tricky, it's very dangerous to build it up. And that happened with Lehman Brothers, and unfortunately 15 years later, in a different context, a similar experience happened to Credit Suisse, which led to the... But there was mainly management failure. And how then the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers affected your professional life? I moved prior to the bankruptcy to Credit Suisse, more for personal reasons, because I was setting up a family back then, and was difficult to commute, and for multiple other reasons also, because Credit Suisse has this center here in Switzerland, and it also has a very interesting structured products department. It was the headquarters, as opposed to, Zurich is more like an outlier of London. And I didn't really live through it at Lehman Brothers back then, when the bank went bankrupt. But it affected a lot our business, because we were on structured product side for private banking clients. And I remember back then our team had, beginning of 2008, 2007, our team heads were discussing, we need to start actually alarming the clients that there is Lehman Brothers, and we started probably 8 or 9 months before the effective bankruptcy to start making clients aware of the fact that Lehman Brothers is a credit risk. As you can imagine, back then, if you talked about credit issuer risk, credit risk, beginning of 2008, people would look at you and say, whatever. It was no one who actually would consider potential collapse. This was unimaginable.
And you mentioned that you were building your family at the beginning. Can you tell us how was it? Because you didn't take a break, as I saw on your LinkedIn.
I didn't know.
And so
the maternity leave. 6
yeah,
months,
maternity leave. Yeah. Is it enough for raising a child, like 14 weeks officially, and maybe a little bit more?
Credit Suisse gave back then 6 months, and I was very happy that my parents could support a lot, because otherwise it's really difficult with 6 months. They're very small and they're sick very often if you give them to a daycare, but we were very lucky that we had a family support. And this basically helped. Otherwise, I think it's really tough. If you don't take a week, a month, you need at least a year if you don't have family to stabilize.
And could your husband take a paternity leave also to help?
No, back then at Lind, 1 day.
1 day?
Yes.
Crazy. Okay. So then, Julius Bär, you've worked there with the ultra high net worth individuals, and I've Googled and find out that these individuals need to have at least 30 million on their bank account. And how many clients did you have under your management? If it's not a secret, of course.
No, to be frank with you, I don't recall the exact numbers, because I was in a team which was responsible for structuring the investment. So we would see on average 10 to 20 big clients plus several smaller ones. Smaller is a very relative, by the way, concept compared to our normal human perceptions of wealth. But normally you would be in an active kind of a support and role of 10, maximum 20 clients.
So it's approximately at least 300 millions of francs. Am I right? At least
more. We would manage. More, we would manage depending. If you look into the assets under management, it would go towards billion.
And you manage like yourself, or
no? What we would do, you would have the setup of a bank is as follows. At least back then, you would have a relationship manager. You would also have, for clients who are very actively trading, an investment advisor, and then you would have someone who overall supervises what's happening with the strategic asset allocation, etc. And our team was responsible also for basically making sure of the total wealth overview, how assets are allocated, because remember, the clients don't have only liquid assets, they have a lot of real estate, they have also direct investments in companies, etc., etc. They have also luxury assets, or as we call them, lifestyle assets. You have like these big categories, right? You have real estate, lifestyle assets, and market assets, or equities and bonds. And for the liquid part, we would obviously be together with, it's a group of people who always work on one client. It's never only one person. And there is a good reason for that, because you need to make sure that it's the whole knowledge of the bank is bundled and delivers the know-how, and also to make also sure that different aspects are covered, and obviously absences. When someone's sick or someone goes on holidays, you need to make sure that there is a team. That's how we function. So the relationship manager in a bank would typically, for those of you who consider banking career, would typically be in charge of the relationship, as the name says it, with the client. He would be the account opening, payments potentially, a lot of other aspects around ultra high net worth clients, like if children are considering to study somewhere, they would be helping with setup and infrastructure around that. But also, you know, the first, basically the first go-to person is the relationship managers. Obviously, they're not specialists in everything, right? And when an ultra high net worth client comes to your bank, there are a lot of questions about account opening. Then some clients want to take a credit. So obviously also you would have people from the credit department. Some bring money and say, I want to be invested, and all those type of things. And we would be on the part of the total wealth overview, managing the investments, but also supporting with the liabilities. One of the classical requests was when a client comes with a bond or equity portfolios and would love to leverage it, something which we call lumber loan, and in order to get a yield enhancement on the returns.
And could you connect with these people outside the work?
Yeah, we're still friends. You mean the colleagues from Julius Bär?
Not colleagues, but these people, clients.
The clients, it's unusual to keep a personal or private or friendship relationship with clients. With the team colleagues of a bank, yes. A lot of my friends are ex-bankers or still bankers. With the clients, it's rather unusual to keep a kind of a, how shall we say, personal relationship, yes.
But this is because of the contract or just because it's...
I think it is partially because you naturally kind of keep a healthy distance, professional healthy distance. Very similar, like for example, if you're a doctor, if you're a medical doctor, you're not necessarily friend with all your patients. Maybe not the same analogy, but contractual aspects, definitely, but also because you want to really have a healthy distance between work and private life. So it's both, combination of a contractual setup with the bank, but also your own environment, which is...
But is it still possible to make this contact? Like, I'm asking because you founded your company later, and so maybe you could use these contacts to then like for investing purposes, maybe, if they were interested in that.
Potentially, yes, but normally the way, yes, with some of the people can keep this type of if you exit the bank and if you particularly after a period of time you continue the friendship, yes, it was in my case. But yes, in theory, you're right, that's possible. But it wasn't the case with me.
Okay, and so comparing three companies you worked at, Lehman Brothers, Credit Suisse, Julius Bär, two of them are in the bankruptcy. Do you find some, maybe we can expect something from Julius Bär?
Yeah, this is the running gag in our team. But no, I hope not.
Yeah, can you find some similarities in culture between these two companies? Maybe there was something in their culture that, especially these two companies led to bankruptcy.
I think generally in banking, and it refers to Lehman Brothers, to Credit Suisse, but also to a lot of other banks, and with the recent scandals about Banco. It's actually very pity that the culture is very short-term oriented, it's short-sighted. The way people are compensated is based on a short-term revenues and assets under management. And if you have this type of compensation structure, it kind of, and you have this pressure to deliver, you need to onboard clients, you need to onboard new assets. Yes, some people say, okay, I'll take the risk not to perform, but other people may be biased towards taking not well considered risks. And this goes through the whole culture of banking. It was the case with Lehman Brothers, where sky was the limit and the company was over leveraged and there was no risk which we cannot take and manage. Turned out the history showed better or taught us a lecture back then as bankers. The same with Credit Suisse. Credit Suisse was a bit of a different animal. It was the culture of, which was really, really not healthy, which was basically a culture which would lead to such type of outcome as it happened. So management is key. When you apply, please look for how a company is managed. Be mindful about that. Luckily, you're the generation where competition is not everything. Top performance it doesn't matter what the cost is not everything. Thanks God you're a different generation. But my generation back then and the generations before us was profit at any cost. And this is toxic. It goes at the cost of the culture, it goes at the cost of building a very unhealthy team dynamics. The management was incredibly short-term oriented. Also in the case of Credit Suisse, it was literally 10, 15, 20 years of management failure, top management failure. And what was very sad, particularly both for Lehman Brothers and for Credit Suisse, was you would see that the majority of the people were very nice. People naturally tend to cooperate. People naturally tend to share knowledge. People naturally want to have a nice life, actually. They don't want to necessarily compete at all costs, etc. But the management, with being very short-term oriented, imposing partially really a toxic culture, I can say. This trickled down through the whole organization. So be very mindful when you start choosing an employer. It's not only that the employer chooses you, you also choose an employer. And it's very, for example, we had a lot of cases in banking where people would have a nervous breakdown. It's not worth it, the money which you're owning, because then you're going to spend them to doctors. And back then, this generation X to which I belong was not making necessarily this calculation. As a woman, because you become at a point of time a mother, and also those ladies who are not mothers, we kind of maybe potentially to serve a certain form of cliche if there are differences between genders. In the meantime, hopefully not. When you're naturally more like kind of, because you have obligation for raising kids at least the first 9 months, you kind of more consider those type of social factors. Luckily, the time is changing, and also a lot of men are very much aware of it. So whole generation is aware of it, of healthy work-life balance, healthy culture, healthy division between family responsibility, children responsibility, independent of the gender. This is great.
And when do you think that people tend to really want to work for such banks for 10, 12 hours?
In our case, it was learning, but it was also prestigious. It was very chic to say I work for an investment bank like Lehman Brothers. My business partner, Tonya, she worked for Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan. These are fantastic names. And when you say, like, you had the feeling, oh, I belong to the elite. And it was the case. When you're junior, you learn a lot. You have access to incredibly interesting people, also the type of clients which we would work and cover. You don't have the opportunity in everyday life to meet such inspiring personalities. A lot were entrepreneurs, or are entrepreneurs. A lot build up companies, a lot were visionary, etc., etc. So banking also opens these doors, not to forget. But it doesn't have to come at any cost. This is the biggest learning, I think, which I would. But I think your generation is not threatened as ours was.
So you think that these banks can make you more, like, raise your entrepreneurship spirit, or?
Not necessarily, because after the changes in 2008, banks got incredibly regulated, for good or bad. Typically, both sides of the equation count a certain point, good and bad aspects, and entrepreneurship in banks was cut actually a lot. Also, another dynamic which is very counterproductive for entrepreneurship in banking is that the management changed a lot. At least at my time in banking, conscious banking, from 06, 07, 08 until 2019, we would have easily every year a new management or a new direct head, etc., etc. You can't build sustainably a project or an entrepreneurial idea, because the next manager comes and he brings his people, or she brings his people, and then the whole carousel starts from the beginning. So I wouldn't say banks are necessarily entrepreneurial, to be honest, in terms of culture.
And I have one more question from before. You've said that you need to check management before applying for the company.
Yes, please. Check the culture and get references.
So can I tell that you going to Credit Suisse was a mistake?
No, it wasn't a mistake, because my generation back then, if you come from banking, they're like some key, particularly with structured products and derivatives, you don't have that many places. And also back then in the early 30s, in my generation was not aware how important culture is, to be frank with you. We were happy to be working for a big name. We were happy to have the opportunity to learn. And there were two big names in Switzerland, UBS and Credit Suisse, where you go and learn about structured investments. And also ZKB. But UBS and Credit Suisse had these huge trading floors, huge investment banks on the back of it. So it was like the places to go. I don't regret it for a second. It was a very valuable working experience. And I think it really helped me develop the know-how and the skill sets which I'm happy to deploy now also in my company.
And you've said that Credit Suisse had an unhealthy,
top management. Yes.
Top management.
Yes. The teams, the micro teams, were very good functioning, because people again, you build up friendships. People naturally tend to cooperate. But on macro management, strategic level, it was. I assume you follow the news. There were permanently changes. There were a lot of scandals. There were a lot of wrong decisions how to deploy capital. And a company can only take a certain amount of macro shocks. And this is what happened.
And was the bad management the reason why you left Credit Suisse for Julius Bär?
It was the opportunity to build something and take the know-how which I'm developing over the years. This was the reason. But within the group I was working with, we had a very good team atmosphere.
But again, you've said that you would rather work at Credit Suisse one more time. If you could.
I would rather work in Credit Suisse for the fact that the skill set which I brought would have been and the knowledge which I collected, if I would place myself back then with with early 30s, Credit Suisse would get by business orientation, by the way the bank is positioned, because it was bigger, because it has an investment banking department, much more opportunities to provide services for ultra high net worth. Yes, it would be the better suit in terms of skill set. Culture-wise, both has plus and minuses. Julius Bär used to be, I don't know how it is now, but it used to be a bit more familiar, which is a huge plus. Then again, there were a little bit less opportunities on what kind of capacities the bank can bring, because by nature it's a private bank as opposed to a big general universal bank as is Credit Suisse. And from my skill set, in this stage of development and first career step, yes, Credit Suisse was the better step as a match for learning, etc. Culture-wise, it's very, you see, when you start working, the culture which immediately impacts you is in the teams. And this is I was lucky in both environments to have very, very minor good teams. The more you raise in the hierarchy, the more you get the dynamics also of the top management. And it's not I think it's a commonly known secret that banks are not necessarily well known for efficient and well-structured management, and that there are a lot of changes, which does not allow for consistent policy over the years.
So banks have really lots of bureaucracy processes.
A lot of bureaucracy, but also a lot of political struggles. A lot of there are clear competences. There are bureaucracies for good reason, but banks by nature, because the compensations are big, attracts particular type of people, and on the top management level, and you have several dimensions, like to be clever, to be successful, to create a good performance, but the dimension to be a good team player, or to probably take care of your team, to raise your team, to educate your team, to make sure they grow, is not necessarily a dimension for which you are officially yes, but de facto you're not remunerated for that, right? And a lot of banks don't have a proper, how shall I say, career paths. They have it on paper, but it's not like that you sit and do a proper development, human capital development, which every bank should actually do, every team should do, because the production resource of a bank are the people. It's a lot of room of improvement, to put it mildly, and very much depending on the team head.
And I read in one article that you've said with Tonya, another co-founder.
This is my co-founding partner, yes.
That you were tired of corporate everyday life because of the endless meetings every day.
Yes, and the endless politics, yes. We would spend 80% in doing politics, presentations, meetings, and the productive time would be probably 20%. And this is a natural progression in banking, the more you raise in the hierarchy. And it was a point of time where we said, look, it actually would be great to do something completely different, which gives meaning, and where you go home at the end of the day, you know what you've done.
So when you were at senior positions, then you've had to do very little things connected to finance. It was more with meetings connected, or like?
In the more senior you get, the more you spend with meetings, with strategizing, with making sure that the politics are intact, etc., and you don't have a lot necessarily with the day-to-day business. And I really love the handicraft of investing in the day-to-day business. I was missing it a lot. And another reason which drove me to reconsider the sense of what I'm doing is the realization that working for years for the largest clients of the bank, there is a big there is one essential difference between very wealthy clients and people like every one of us out there. The first one, the wealthy are invested in the capital markets long terms, and most of us are not, because we lack financial literacy. Obviously you don't, because you study economics, but even then, very few people have the skill and the habit to invest, whereas wealthy people are invested. And it's not necessarily in what they are invested or some super duper exclusive opportunities. It's all about the fact that they are participating from the long-term growth of the capital markets. And Tony and I took a decision to exit banking and to really start our own business. One of the major topics and the focus being financial literacy.
Yeah, I've also read that Tonya said that what really annoyed you is that banks were focused on, obviously, on really big wealth individuals with many millions, but they forget about people, like ordinary people as us. But do you think it can contribute to social inequality that rich people become even richer and not so rich people?
Yes, it definitely. How do you call it in English? We call it the Einkommensschere in German. You would call it the difference in income between rich and normal people gets bigger and bigger. Absolutely. And you all have heard this quote: the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, the poor get poorer. One of the main reasons is the fact that a lot of ordinary people don't have access to the capital markets. Not necessarily technically don't have access, but they don't have access in an indirect sense. They don't have the knowledge how to start investing. A lot lack certain confidence that they can build wealth. Very often you hear a reason: I don't have enough money. I have very little amount of money to invest. And but that's not true. You can start actually already with 10 francs. And those 10 francs, nowadays, your generations have access to zero-cost brokers with no fees and with zero transaction costs. So use that. And indeed, the lack of knowledge and the lack of investing and the lack of having this awareness that everyone, each and every one of us in modern times of technology can create wealth, contributes exactly to this huge difference. And there are only 1% of the people whom banks cover.
And so you've created UMushroom.
Correct. Ooh la la.
How did you come up with the idea of UMushroom, that you need this learning investment platform for youth and grown-ups?
The major trigger was we started brainstorming 2019. We've been friends since 16 years, and we met at Credit Suisse in 2007 and kept friendship since then, initially worked together. We started brainstorming 2019 and pointing out always what works and what doesn't work in banking. And we know the whole value chain, from producing investment ideas all the way to distributing them to the end clients. We know how many ideas are produced out there by the industry, how little is seen by the end clients. We know how much information gets dissipated, literally disappears in these endless chains of the banks, and the banks are the gatekeepers of the distribution channels, investment ideas to end clients. All those pain points we saw, but what was the major trigger was really, as I mentioned, 1% of the population is wealthy, the rest is not. And the reason is, we are not taught how to invest. Financial literacy is not part of the standard financial education. If you don't study economics, or if you don't go to an economic gymnasium, which is available in Switzerland, but a lot of other countries don't even have it, and worldwide you don't have it, you don't know how to manage your money. And you probably, there are very sad statistics, 50% of the population lives with less than $5 a day. And I think the reason why we said we want to exit is also humanitarian driven, with the idea to really do something against poverty. And knowledge is power. A way to exit out of poverty is to build up the skills to really start investing, and maybe not in the poorest parts of the world yet, but in large parts of the world, at least in our geographical areas, in Europe, in broad parts of Asia, Americas, even Africa, people can start invest with very little and continuously build wealth. And this is what really inspired us to do.
So you want to help people to become more wealth?
Yes.
Yes.
We believe that people who really, we want to give back power to the people and empower them to take responsibility for their financial wealth, the same way we do take responsibility for our physical wealth or for our mental being, for staying physically fit, mentally fit, the same way you can also stay financially fit and build financial fitness. And remember, you have these three production resources, right? You have your physical power, which you can use for work, etc. You have your mental capabilities, and then the third resource is your money. And we are not at all aware how we are invested. A lot of us are not aware where the money goes day in, day out, and how much we spend. And we recently had a very interesting chat with one of our younger team members, because we have a very young team. They're all in their late 20s, beginning of their 30s. And one of them told us, look, I can't invest, I don't have enough money. And we were like, wait a second, how many coffees to go do you drink per week? And he goes, like, every day one. I was like, there we go, these are your 5, 6, 10 francs. And this is one ETF, guys. And you know what happens if you put every month 100 ETFs, 100 francs in an ETF, which covers the global markets, let's say an ETF in SMI or S&P 500 or any of the large equity markets? The compounding effect. In 30 years, you have roughly 300,000. In 40 years, you have 350,000. If we assume an average return of, let's say, 8%. And historically, the broad Swiss equity market index, over the last 100 years, according to a study of Pictet, they did a very diligent study and publish it every year. The Swiss broad market index returns on average 9.5% nominal return, historically. Well, of course, history is never a predictor for the future, but it gives you a little bit of an idea that the capital markets are growing. Whether it's going to be again 9.5% less or more, to be seen. But but it grows, and we are very short-sighted as investors. We see the mood swings within a year, 2 years on the equity markets, but we forget the big pictures, that equities grow over time, or markets grow over time, the equity markets. And we step back out of fear because we think we're not going to be able to invest. Reality is, or that we may lose money. Reality is we're losing money if we don't invest because of the inflation. And we very often hear this quote, I'm very safe. Even friends from us from banking, oh, I don't invest a lot because I'd rather keep it cash because I want to be safe. Well, you're not saving cash. Your purchasing power, the real purchasing power diminishes. And even in Switzerland, we had, over the last 4 years, an inflation of roughly 10 to 20% on some of the major foods. I remember when we started, Tony and I, to work, it was the early 2000s, we had a completely different prices of food and living costs. And relatively similar nominal salaries, as opposed to now, where we have everything being 10, 20, even partially, who knows, 30% more expensive, depending whether we're talking about food or living costs. You're not compensated for that. Yeah, and you need to invest, because long-term the compensation is through equity markets. These are the ones who protect you against inflation. If the world does not collapse and if it continues to develop and to be in the same framework as we know it.
But how do you think, is it possible to bring already grown-ups to invest if they didn't invest their whole life? It's
surprisingly yes, because a lot of our educational clients are grown-ups. They're in 40 plus in the age of Tony and me, even 45 plus. And a lot of people actually start realizing the need to invest, because food gets more expensive. Some get closer to the retirement and realize that their retirement packages maybe would not facilitate the same living standard as they used to. Your generation, please, even more aware, because we may have some kind of pension funds, but for you, if the pension fund system collapses, always possible, if there is not enough money to be generated, because we have an aging population, as you know, and the amount of aging people increases by year. You know that the pension funds of aging people and the life expectancy on top of it also increases. So imagine how much money needs to be redistributed to facilitate that people who are now retiring get their retirement packages until the end of their lives. Who is producing this money? It's us. Of course, they also have savings and they've been investing in Pillar 1, 2, 3. But yet, if that is not enough at a point of time, there would be a huge redistribution. So each and every one of us needs to start investing also next to Pillar 1, 2, 3 freely, in order to make sure that you're safe for eventualities, that you have enough money to buy one day your own house, that you finance education of children. Maybe you want to become an entrepreneur. It's good to have a bit money aside, because you may need to bootstrap the first years, as was the case with Tonya and me the first 2 years, until we found an investor. You may need to really, you may want to do even a world journey. All those are things which you are able to finance if you invest systematically and you start early.
That's very inspiring. Now coming back to UMushroom, can you tell us this journey? Yesterday you are an employee at Julius Bär, and today you are an entrepreneur with your own company. Can you tell us these steps that you took, like in general, like how is it to become entrepreneur, to open your company?
I came into entrepreneurship relative at my time at Julius Bär, because I had the pleasure to build up together with our team a platform for financing entrepreneurs in the field of private debt. And I remember thinking back then, it was 2016, 17, 18, you would see all those entrepreneurs and you'd see people struggling, because when you build up a company, it's inspiring, but it's not a walk in the park. And I was like, why are they so happy? Because all of them, you would see them there facing issues about providing financing the idea, working, being overworked, but they were happy. And I was like, why are they so happy? And we're kind of really well paid, have somewhat regulated working hours, but we're not that happy. And it was very interesting. Most of them had a cause and were burning for an idea which they want to really put into life. So this was my contact, really very, very close first sight with entrepreneurs. When we decided to, it started with a brainstorming. It started with the idea that we want to change something. Very similar like you guys, you're also here because you want to change something. And in the beginning, we didn't even know exactly what we want to change. We only knew we want to change something in the financial system because it's not working as it should be. And we knew what is not working, but we had an idea how it could be. And this idea started, it crystallizes as you go. And the first year we were brainstorming, 2019, working full time. As you can imagine, we could not do a lot because working and having families and, and also brainstorming, it was once per week. And at a point of time, 2019, there was again a restructuring in both banks, and we said, okay, now is the moment. If we want to really jump out, if we get stuck again in the next position, that's going to go another 2-3 years, and now is the moment. Let's do it. And we literally jumped into the cold water and started our company in beginning of January 2020 on a piece of paper, on a literally blank piece of paper, standing brainstorming. But it was a process. It wasn't, there were still a lot of opportunities coming to us on our desk outside from the banking industry. It was very, very, how shall we say, this was when we really started consciously thinking what it would be to be an entrepreneur. And then in April, May 2020, we hired our first developer, and then it kind of really started getting more and more concrete, getting more and more shape, getting more and more shape. Of course, a lot of fears, because if you're employed, you're used to regular income. If you're self-employed, there is a period of time where you don't have income. A lot of people would say, but why would you leave a safe environment? And it triggered a lot of process thinking in us, and we figured out, what is a safe environment? Is banking a safe environment? And you know that banks are permanently under cost pressure, cost cutting, etc. you could be fired tomorrow in theory just because of cost cutting, or something else can happen. And the only way to really have security is to rely on your own skills. And that's what helped us. This realization helped us carry on and really grow into this embody fully the entrepreneurship role. And it was piece by piece. In summer, by late summer, we already had 2 developers and a UX designer. We had our first tester, and then slowly but surely it took form. And in November 2020, we formally founded the company as a Aktiengesellschaft, as a shareholding company. And at the beginning, it was the 2 of us. Then later, colleagues of us from Credit Suisse joined, ex-colleagues from Credit Suisse, and the team grew piece by piece. We started working with the University of Zurich 2021. It was Corona, and students were locked down, as you know, and we're very happy to have a platform where they can connect and build portfolios. And this is what UMushroom does. You can build paper portfolios, you can have your own profile page, and you can also have your group page of the university. And that's how we slowly started, and it's already our 5th year.
It's amazing. And of course, founding a company is not only about the ups, but also about the downs. Can you tell us about your critical phases and how did you handle them?
It's a very good question. And entrepreneurship, as you say, is it's a lot of ups and downs. It's normal. And we are very blessed to be in a situation where we go together through this journey. For those of you who consider becoming entrepreneurs, I warmly recommend do it with a partner. It's much easier. Because there is always someone, if your spirits are down, the other one keeps the spirits up, and vice versa. If the spirits of one of us is down, the other one is like normally with the spirits up. And also, one of the biggest elements which I remember was very, very critical for us was when we were looking for a financing round for funds for the seed round. And in Switzerland and in continental Europe, it's very spread, the perception that you should do a business which is business to business, B2B. It's much more quicker to become profitable. But we always wanted to be a B2C company because this is our vision. The name comes inspired from the universe of the UMushrooms, which is the 3rd kingdom next to plants and living and animals and humans. They're interconnected, they're all equal, they cooperate, and that's our vision for a fully functioning financial systems where people share knowledge, grow together, everyone has the opportunity to build wealth. It's like an invisible World Wide Web, the same way as the mushrooms are. It's one living organism to connect investors and to really build a beautiful investment network. And when you talk about that to a lot of venture capitalists, they will be like, "Ooh, these 2 are dreamers."
Dreamers, yeah.
And how are you going to do that? That's not possible. And then, there are moments where you go home and you're like, "Ooh, maybe we should really consider B2B and sell the engine of our services," because we have a fantastic library of products and a super search engine which can serve any bank. Most of the banks back then in 2019 did not have such search engines where you press 3 clicks and you find what you're looking for. To visualize a search engine of a traditional bag, let's take the example of Zalando. If you're looking for a blue pullover for men, it's pullover, blue, and men, 3 filters. You click them, you get the results. Analogy in banking. If you're using the internal systems, because they're evolved over 30 years, the first thing is, if you type blue pullover, what you're getting is a red socks, green trousers, potentially coats, etc., etc. If you're lucky after one, then searching, you get blue pullover. So that's how the search engines in financial products function. That's why people have barriers to invest, because you have the feeling it takes ages to find what you're looking for. Long story short, this was something which a lot of people will tell us sell to the banks because it's a beautiful tool and they may use it. And then we walked back always to our office. Back then we were having, rented offices, shared offices. And we said, hey, no way, why? No, we want to be B2C. That's what we're going to do. And it took us a lot of courage and strength to pick up, because we had, I don't know how many no's, we were counting them, definitely above 50, by the way, because we as you say, we had some networks, not very close from business, whom we asked. We had a lot of networks from, you know, the venture startups, etc., the venture scene. The amount of no's which we received is amazing, and we always had to pick us up after such no's. And finally, we found our investor, and we found our investor because I personally believe because we were very authentic. And this person believed also in our vision and in our mission and said, okay, let's hop together on a journey. We're going to be partners and we're going to build it up together. And it was a huge, we're incredibly grateful for having this opportunity. But this was one of the biggest challenges, to really keep the spirits up and believe, yes, there is one day, we're going to find this person one day who really believes in what we think is true.
It's really like a role model, especially once I've heard a phrase from Vinod Khosla, co-founder of Sun Microchips. He said that mostly like 90% of the people would do what expected from them to do instead of what they really want to do. And that's like an example of how you stand to your principles. And it's amazing to hear, especially as a woman, I guess. I've read that there were some difficulties.
Oh yeah, there is a bias. I mean, that's a fact. A lot of the, not in your generation, but only 1% of the venture funds goes to female-founded, worldwide, to female-founded companies.
That's crazy. Yeah. Can you tell us more, which biases did you encounter in your professional life?
I was working in the, for a large part of my time at the Eastern European desk of Credit Suisse, and thanks to socialism, socializing, etc., this bias does not exist in this part of the world, because both men and women were working. But but when I moved to working more on the Central European markets, and particularly also with typical traditional setups, you could see that there is a what we call glass ceiling, because by nature, the generation, my generation, the generation before me, in most of the top management positions are men, and they would naturally connect with friends from the same gender, and those informal networks are the ones who actually drive very often your career, or a big part of your career, which as a woman are not available to you because there are no women in such a role. If you ask any lady who was working in banking in this period of time, you would probably get the same answer. There is there used to be, I hope it's changing, indeed a glass ceiling for female employees compared to male employees. I very much hope that your generation will not encounter that, because it's very healthy to work in mixed teams. It's very healthy to have also, as a father one day, the opportunity to stay at home with your children. Maybe you also want to be in a situation where you want to rethink what you're doing, and you want to maybe take a different career path, and it's very good to have a partner, a woman who's working and who can kind of finance for a period of time the family life, so that you can navigate and find out what is really your true calling, and to really build a true partnership. This would be, I think in your generation, that's really is going to be the case. It wasn't in ours. It wasn't given. Or not the traditional case, let's put it that way.
And still, I chose finance back at the time when I was in Ukraine, where like there was no such a thing that finance are for women. So I didn't know that it's mostly for women. And then I came to Switzerland, and I started to attend some events from student organizations, and I noticed, and I was like overwhelmed with this, that 70 or even more % are male and not female. And for me, it was like really a surprise that this is not like, for females. Why do you think this is the case? Why?
I think it's very traditional. It's the same in Bulgaria. When I say we're going to a female entrepreneurship event, they're like, what? Really? Why? I mean, like, male and female are entrepreneurs. We don't have this bias, as mentioned, in Eastern Europe. Historically, and also when I started economics the first year in Bulgaria, the classes were 50-50. You don't have any gender necessarily division. It's more like what interests you. And I'm sure it's same in Ukraine and same in the rest of Eastern Europe. I think it used to be the generations before me in Germany, Switzerland. I don't know how it is in France. I would mainly know Germany, Switzerland, Austria, also from friends and family. very traditional setup. A woman would be at home, and also it was possible to finance the life of a family with one salary. And it was socially well seen. And yeah, traditional setup. There is also, you could also see for a very long period of time, there were very few daycare opportunities here if you want to really work and put the kids in daycare. But things got changing, and very helpful.
I've noticed also that the big four companies, consulting firms, banks, they are all offering now these opportunities, like in internships, especially for women, events dedicated to women. Do you think it's working? It can work, or we are dividing women in a specific group of people?
I think it's it's a good question. It's a necessary process, maybe, to sensibilize and make aware the need to integrate also our gender, here particularly Switzerland, Germany, Austria, and maybe some other parts of Central and Western Europe into the production process. And I'm happy that it's done. Yesterday, I actually just came back yesterday evening from a fintech event, Women in Fintech, and I support a lot of such events. You're right, the question is valid, whether it creates a separation. I personally think it's necessary to create awareness that there is also networks. At a point of time, this division would disappear, I'm sure, because it would be natural. Probably 1-2 generations down the road, you would have 50-50 male and women, male and female in banking. The network would start grouping across genders according to interests. Also friendships would start according to characters and interests, and less so across genders. But it is kind of a necessary step, I think. And I really do support it. It's part of the process, and I really hope in 10 years we don't have female and male events, or if we have, it would be more like in terms of interest and less so about gender.
Do you think it's possible that can such bias arise, that a female working in the investment industry just because she's a woman?
I don't think it's going to happen, because in the meantime there are more and more women working in banking and investing. And luckily, this changes. 20 years ago, most probably, if you start putting okay, you need to have a percentage of women, yes, there would be this reaction, oh yeah, we needed to take someone. But nowadays, enough ladies study finance, or more and more, let's say. Enough ladies study technical educations, and I think this will disappear. These biases which still exist, this would 10-20 years down the road, this will disappear. But it's necessary to kind of first develop it almost artificially. It's ideally, in an ideal world, you would have interest groups and not gender structured groups. But as we have it in the Eastern European part of the world, but it also was a process.
Yeah, it would be great. So, okay, and then moving back to UMushroom, do you have plan B if of course UMushroom will not work out?
It's a very good question. You know what we say in our company? Failure is not an option. We actually really do consider, and mentally it's very interesting. We're so convinced that UMushroom is a success. It's already a success because it's the 5th year in which we are active, and it's a mindset thing. But I don't have plan B because I don't think I need it.
I think it needs a lot of courage to think so. Am I right that you have a slogan as faith moves mountains?
Yes, I do believe really that faith moves mountains, yes.
Which faith do you have?
I'm an optimist by nature. I really think that generally things turns for the better. I'm very, very optimistic to a point that it was a running joke sometimes among friends and business colleagues and family. And I think that if you really truly believe that things are going to be better, they are better. So yeah, I have the faith that this world is developing for better, that our company is going to be a huge success. It's already a success. I really do believe that the world will be one day a better place.
And which mountain could you move with your faith, with your optimism?
The whole, the whole, how shall we say, my experience until now always proved that when I started studying, I moved into a country which back then I didn't know, now is my home, or my next home next to Bulgaria. I had to work, I had to establish my, basically build a life in a completely new and unknown atmosphere. And the general optimism helped a lot. Then banking, as you say, a lot of obstacles, a male-dominated environment, a very competitive environment, anyway, a lot of stress and with everything which comes along, was also something which fate kept me through. And finally, the entrepreneurship, which is really very, very fulfilling, and I wake up every day very happy to do that, and I go to bed very happy to do that. So this is where my faith helped a lot. It continues helping.
So you have your belief system, like your faith, but do you have a mission? Why do you want to do all of that? Why do you want to help people? Why do you want this?
I do. I have something which I really truly believe into and really moves me, and in difficult times when I'm overtired, helps me get up. And with the risk of sounding very cheesy, it's very humanitarian driven. I really do believe that human life should be equally worth everywhere on this planet. Really, doesn't matter where you come from, doesn't matter what your background is, what your color, gender, etc., etc. Whatever you take as an attribute, I do believe that human life should be valued equally everywhere. And it's not the case, as we know. We see what's happening geopolitically, and we don't need to look way back or far away to see all the political conflicts. I think one major element would be to change this and to really contribute that human value is equal everywhere is by empowering people, really empowering people to take responsibility for their finances. Because finance is not only giving you, investing is not only giving you the opportunity to have a good life, right? That this is the obvious one, and it's very important, because if you have a good life, if you feel safe, you're obviously more relaxed, you have more a free mindset capacity to do good things. But what you invest into is also what you support. So our money has a voice, and we can actively exercise this voice. We can actively really take the responsibility and say, do you want to invest in this company, yes or no? How is it shaping the world better? And if we would be much more conscious how we invest, much less money will end up in the wrong hands. And much less money would be used to cause the troubles which we currently see, all those wars and all those type of unnecessary conflicts and dramas which are going around the globe. So a conscious attitude and a conscious handling of money and investing is essential, in my view, for changing our life on this planet. And you guys are young, you still can shape so much. You can really use your money as a voice and put it in those companies which you think are shaping the world the way you want to have it, and also for your children.
Thank you. It's so inspiring insight. Thank you.
Thank you.
So my questions are over. Do we have some questions from the audience?
Wow. That's a really cool one.
Yes.
I need to get one like that.
You use the word wealthy a lot, so what does that mean for you? And do you have your own client manager now, if I'm allowed to ask that?
You can. You're more than I have two client managers or investment managers. One is myself. I do invest my own money, but the second one is my older son, who is turning 16 this year in October, and I keep asking him because he spends a lot of time, both my sons spend a lot of time in front of of games, as you can imagine. It's all those Zeldas and Minecrafts of this world. And I asked him a year ago, I was like, you're spending so much time before, like, you know, the metas of this world get richer and richer. Where would you put your money? And my NVIDIA investments is thanks to my younger son and my older son. He goes like, don't put your money into, what was it back then, Nintendo. Buy NVIDIA last year.
Oh, wow.
Now that you knew what's happening. So yeah, so this is I keep asking him, what are you playing? Who is the producer? He goes like this. And I was like, okay, let's check the companies. With the result, because they are very much close to the technology, with the result that we vary together with my two boys. The older one, the younger one is too young, he's still 11, turning 12. But we watch together the NVIDIA reports and discuss a lot. So this is...
They just released quite good earnings.
Yes.
I'm sure you agree.
Yeah.
But, so you just said you invested in NVIDIA, and you talk about that a lot of people should start investing. So I have two questions for that. The first one is, would you agree with what is generally known as like the Warren Buffett rule, just like put your money monthly with dollar cost averaging in some like free index portfolio and never look at it again?
Yes, I agree with that. Put every month certain amount in the broad equity market and never look at it. Don't get fooled by randomness and by this drama which is going. Sometimes the markets are very moody. Put that as a core part. I completely agree with that rule, and that's what we're teaching actually, how to select ETFs and funds, how to be mindful of structuring a cost-efficient portfolio. Be aware that most markets are efficient, the broad markets. It's very difficult to create alpha in the broad US equity market. And as Benny, I'm sure, is teaching you in Benny Building. And but if you want to get a feeling about the markets, the way that goes would be through your satellite part of your portfolio, and this is the stock pickings, i.e. the NVIDIAs and the super microcomputers of this world. And I currently bought Reddit because I'm very passionate about their story, and they're another AI player. So my older son got me hooked on AI. Also because he started writing text per WhatsApp without typos, and we figured out it's thanks to AI. And so this really can do magic. But yes, in your satellite part, you can really play with stock picking. And I don't know, if you want to say, for example, our younger teams, they permanently plan weekend trips or want to buy new furniture or new stuff which they like, and they would stock pick with small part of their portfolio to and sell it then, obviously, on a profit, and with the money they would buy themselves a perk. This you can always do, but long-term wealth is really built by just averaging the costs, as you say, Warren Buffett. Yeah, I agree with that.
If you're allowed to disclose any numbers from UMushrooms, are you profitable yet?
Not yet. No, we are. We planned, hope to be break-even in end of 2025. We started. We create revenues. Yes, we do. We started actively working. We launched our alpha version beginning of 2022, end of 2021, after tweaking and tailoring in 2022. Initially, we were creating revenues from asset managers, from licensing the platform as a branding and communication channel for asset managers. Because you should imagine an asset manager like the big names, as you know, the Mundis, the Invescos, the Franklin Templetons of this world, using the traditional revenue distribution channels of banks are expensive, yet necessary. But for them, it's also a good way to experience different alternative distribution channels, because you then come in touch with the next generation. So we are licensing the platform for those type of players, and these are our initial revenues. So now we're starting education. So on UMushroom as a B2C, you can sign up for free, anyone can, and consume financial information about all funds and ETFs allowed for distribution in Europe and Switzerland, almost 5,000 stocks globally and 200 cryptos, the largest ones. Build portfolios, paper portfolios. If you want to trade, you can. You can connect it to your Swiss quote and Neon account, and later on with some more. We're starting now to monetize our education, but we just literally launched it a month ago. So yeah, we need another year and a half.
Okay.
But thank you.
Would you ever consider going public?
Yeah, definitely. This is our exit strategy, if there is any exit strategy, because we often get this question: would you sell it to another bank, or would you? Our dream scenario is that when we're big enough and create revenues, and if we want to open it for public, yes. It's probably, the exit strategy is not the right expression. I can imagine that Tony and I would be working probably until we are kind of, I don't know. But, and obviously then pass it over to the next generation. But yes, if we would imagine a growth scenario, that would be going public. And we would love to do it in Switzerland. Comes on top of it, because every tech company runs to the US because it's a broader market. We hope until then the European market changes and gets a bit more deeper and active, and be nice to have it. But who knows? Famous last words. Then we maybe also go to NASDAQ.
Good. So I've heard some experts say that there is a trend or growth in private markets. This ties in also to what you said earlier, that the rich get richer, and companies/institutions, they can get access to financing privately. And this also leads to companies having less incentive to go public, which could mean, I'm asking if you agree with this, that indices such as the S&P 500, etc., that they are a less good representative index of the capital markets. So as a student, as a private person that isn't an ultra high net worth person that can casually invest in private markets, would you still agree that there's a lot of potential in investing in public indices that will hopefully have the same return as the past few decades?
Well, look, I assume it's a very good question. There is definitely, if you compare the returns from private investors, there you're compensated for providing liquidity, because there is a huge liquidity premium, right? The stock is not listed, it's not accessible to the broader market, there is no proven track record. So you have like this type of premium because you are financing the company, and you're also investing in an illiquid asset. You're also helping to build up a business. So you're carrying a much higher entrepreneurship risk as on an established businesses. Definitely a much higher returns to expect. Goes without saying. So it's such a major event as substantial business growth or substantial step going public. And it's a very popular investing strategy to invest in pre-IPOs, as you know, and there are a lot of companies offering access to potential IPO candidates. Yet, it's a different type of risk and a different type of return pattern. Both are valid, both are in the field of equity markets. If we are speaking about equities, obviously you can also invest in private debt versus listed debt. But let's stay with the private equity versus listed equity. The listed equities have the advantage that you can obviously enter and exit at any time. Liquidity is a huge advantage. Listed equities in general profit from the general economic growth, from the huge amount of liquidity which is still in the markets, and it's growing because the US is permanently printing money. They have a huge debt, 35 trillion, and they have to print money already in order to serve their interest rate debt. So this money has to go somewhere. It goes back into the equity markets. Population is growing, demand is growing. Generally, the world economies are in growth mode. And that is going to be cash out, certainly also part through the liquid markets. The difference would be, again, this liquidity / early stage entrepreneurship premium. Different risk pattern, depending on your preferences. Also, if you invest in companies, You know that with not yet established businesses, it very much depends on in which stage the company is. Do you have a proof of concept? Is the company already in a growth models? After proof of concept, is it into growing products, growing geographically? Is it tapping into preparations for IPO? Different stages, different risk premium. The earlier in the stage you enter, the much higher the return. That is a fact. But also the much higher the risk, and you know what this risk, and you know what they say. If you're a private equity, if you enter into a private equity fund in a portfolio out of, I don't know, 20 companies, one is a success, some struggle, some really close. So this is the nature. It's a bit of a make it or break it type of risk, which you don't have on the listed markets to that extent.
Thank you so much for your answer.
You're welcome.
You want obviously equality and for everybody to have the knowledge to invest in capital markets. Do you think it would be wise to make private markets more accessible to?
Yes, I think it would be amazing if private markets are more accessible, and a lot of companies and some of our partners on the platform are working very strong in this direction. And I think it would be a great thing if private markets are more accessible. It would facilitate entrepreneurs to raise easily money and be less dependent on such type of a broker market, which is effectively the venture capital world. It would allow people to get much more familiar with the different investment ideas. And I think to create a kind of a pre-market would be an amazing thing. So I'm absolutely supporter of the idea to make private markets much more accessible, subject to clarifying the investors about the possible risks. It's very important.
I'm sorry, are you working currently on a solution for that?
We do. We are actually offering, we have a private market corner. We partner with various companies. Splint Investors, for example, one of our partners, Swiss Peers is one of our partners. We're in talk with some few other big names, and we really help those we act as a marketplace. And yes, we bundle these different providers and help to give them a marketplace for that. Yes, we are currently working very actively on solution.
Perfect. I guess I need to subscribe to the newsletter then.
You should. More than welcome. And you can also, all of you, join for free, right? It's a free subscription.
Okay, so my question would be if you have any preferences for certain industries. For instance, our last guest, Dr. Ralph Seitz, he felt very strongly about decarbonizing portfolios and green investing. And so would you encourage people to invest in more green companies and also not invest in defense companies?
Ideally, yes, but it's very difficult to be entirely consistent because a lot of other sectors are providers to services to the defense and to the weapon producing companies. So it's super difficult to be really, really consistent with green technologies. It's all about the quality of data.
Is that harder to do or less profitable?
It's not less profitable because technology doesn't necessarily need to be used only for weapons and for... Currently, the majority of innovations come from that sector, but if there is a substantial shift, it could be used at a different place and a different position. But yes, you can... I don't think it's less profitable. Currently, that's how the system operates, that any innovation goes into this field, but it doesn't have to be the case.
My last question would have just been that...
No. The questions are amazing, by the way. It's very valid, particularly because there is a general belief that if you invest sustainable, you're not profitable. That's not at all the case. And this mindset is changing very strong.
So thank you very much. It was such a great discussion, interview with you. Thank you very much. I'm so excited now. So we wish you a lot of luck in your everyday life, in the development of UMushroom. Thank you once again for coming here. It's really our pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for the amazing questions and for the opportunity to exchange with you guys. Very inspiring. Yeah.